You're listening to Learn How to Podcast with Natascha Moy and the Power of Podcasting. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about frequency and length. For some reason, I always put these two things together. I'm sure that there should be one section on frequency and one section on length, but for some reason I teach them together and I always think of them as a single episode. So frequency and length are really interesting because this is a common question. In fact, when I'm doing my podcasting courses, without fail, within the first, I'd say 15 minutes, someone has their hand up going, can you tell us about how long a podcast should be? So this is the basics that I kind of think around the podcasting medium for length, and also obviously for frequency, but specifically for length. I think people are concerned because it means that they might have to speak for a little bit longer, or that they would have to edit, or they'll have to somehow, it puts pressure on everyone. But actually, I think the idea of having a specific length means that you actually manage your podcast so much better. You actually manage your podcast within a certain time frame. What I have learned from doing live shows is that you have to get on and you have to get off in a certain time frame, and you then have to manage your information. So it becomes what is pertinent, what is interesting, what is now, rather than long waffly stories that take you off into a million miles away and you suddenly lose the thread of what you're talking about, and that becomes just so boring. I often know that if I start to tune out of my guests' answers, pretty much everybody else is tuned out already a few minutes before. So it's a good gauge. If you're engaged and you're involved in the process and listening, then the person who is listening to you will also be engaged. So that is worth considering when you're doing these. But let's talk a little bit about how long should a podcast be. You know, there are no rules with podcasting, which is why it's such an incredibly beautiful medium. You can do whatever you want, and no one's going to say that's bad or that's good. No one's out there to judge you. They want to know how great your information is. Can you connect with your audience? That's more important. Can your guest connect to you? And then can you connect all of you to your listeners and your audience? That probably is where your brain should be when you're thinking about the process. However, as a rule of thumb, I don't believe that podcasts should go for more than, I'd say, 55 minutes. I think more than that psychologically is quite a commitment. And everyone usually listens to a podcast in the car driving somewhere. Often it's not over an hour. It's when you're on your lunch break, when you go for your exercise walk, or when you are on your treadmill on the bike. You know, you might listen when you are doing the laundry. So those things normally take under an hour, and you want something that will fit in and entertain you for that period of time. Over that, you start getting into some dangerous territory in terms of, is it even interesting at that point? Over an hour listening to two voices. Usually within a broadcasting environment, live broadcasting, they require you to play a song at least once every 15 minutes to break everyone's thought process and to give the listener a little bit of a break. So when you're talking, and especially if a guest doesn't have a particularly dynamic voice, it can actually get quite flat and a little bit sort of ho-hum. I like to keep my podcasts between 30 and 45 minutes. It doesn't always happen. If someone's fascinating, then, you can go to town. But that's my rule. If I'm podcasting on my own and it's an expert podcast, something like this, I tend to try and keep it 10 to 15 minutes, especially if you're teaching somebody something, because I think it's hard to grasp all the nuances of what you're learning. You might want to go back and do that particular podcast a few times. So you're not going to commit to an hour at a time to, learn how to use a microphone or do an expert status podcast on any subject. Actually is probably going to be a little bit challenging. Over that 15-20 minutes, I'd be fully cutting it off at that point. So I think when you talk about length, you need to kind of plan it so that each one of your podcasts more or less comes in at the same place. The other thing that you need to think about with length is not only the listener and the way the listener is going to perceive it, but also the guest and how much space that gives the guest to kind of talk. Now, if they're fascinating, that's great. If they're not, it just gives them a grandstand opportunity. And you need to be a little bit careful about how to manage their material. Lots of them come on with an agenda. They know what they want to get out of it. And sometimes it's not what you want to get out of it. So lots of people use it as an opportunity to promote their business or themselves, and they will lead the conversation in a way that gives them the opportunity of doing that. And I know lots of guests who do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. But as a podcast host, it's your job to kind of control the process. So that's something that you need to think about. Also, with length, I don't believe in editing. So editing is something that I teach my students to avoid at all costs, possibly because I hate editing. I once did an incredible interview with a Holocaust survivor. It was meant to be for a 30-minute radio show, and it was an extra 15 minutes. It must have taken me an hour and a half to cut those 15 minutes out. A, because she was fascinating, and B, because I was attached to every little bit of information. So cutting it and editing it was heartbreaking. Everything I cut, I just was devastated by. Plus, you are sitting going through 45 minutes and trying to cut out 15. It's you try and cut 100 words out of a paragraph and see how hard that is. Then you get an idea of how hard it is to cut an interview that you've done and listened to. So I really believe that you kind of plan it, you script it, you pre-interview, you understand where you're going, and you kick off with that time frame in mind. And by all means, and I've done this many times, sit with a little clock watch next to you and watch the time. Watch the time on your equipment so that you're having a look and you're going, okay, we're getting there. And by just at the end, you say, thank you so much, we've come to the end. Even if you haven't come to the end, you can always go back and re-interview that person for a second episode. So I think that's really important in terms of the length of how long you want to actually keep your podcasts, the ball in the air for. And it's tiring as well. So they're not that easy. Now, the other thing is the frequency. I get asked this all the time. What are the rules around frequency? Well, once again, podcasting has no rules. There are no rules. Yay. We can do a complete happy dance. If I was Ellen, I might do that, but I'm not. So I think frequency is how often you can manage to put out a podcast. Now, one of the things that I often recommend is that you stack. So you want to stack 2 or 3 episodes. You've always got them in the bag. You want to launch with 3 episodes really, really quickly so that, somebody might love what you've dropped, and then all of a sudden they're like, where is the next one? Oh, too hard. So put 3 down to launch your series with, and then go for whatever you can manage. If it's monthly, do it monthly. If it's a business, I highly recommend you're doing an expert series. You do all of them up front, and then you can drop at a regular interval. If it's entertainment, interview-based, a fortnight is acceptable. Weekly is acceptable. I have done ones where, I get a little bit bored and I don't drop for a couple of weeks, but I'm not that attached to them. So if this is about branding and your business and getting people to listen to you, and you want to grow that really fast and significantly, then I recommend that you try and get one down a week. But a fortnight is not a problem. Monthly, I think that then becomes something that is a pleasure and a hobby, and you just take your time and just enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey, enjoy the experience of learning from everyone else around you, and have some fun. The whole point of podcasting is that it's a joyful medium. It's a medium that gives you a voice. It's fun and funny, and sometimes it's sad, and sometimes you cry, and you meet new people and you learn new things. I cannot recommend it more. So my name is Natascha Moy. I'm a podcasting coach. I do workshops and one-to-one coaching. If you want to pop onto my website, it's www.powerofpodcasting.com.au. There's a whole lot of information there. You can download my free ebook, which is quite fun. And there's a quiz that you can do on one of the emails. And there is also a checklist, a free checklist. So if you're thinking about podcasting, there's some great free resources on my website that you can go and access. And if you want to ask a question and you'd like me to answer it, please email me at hello@powerofpodcasting.com.au. I will be back with another hopefully entertaining and interesting podcast on Learn How to Podcast. Thanks.